If you're stressed about money, this might be the reason no one told you. Because what's causing the pressure isn't what you think. And if you don't see it now, you'll feel it later, much harder. There's a kind of stress that doesn't make noise. It doesn't explode. It stays. Quiet, but constant. You feel it when you wake up, before your mind fully turns on. You feel it when you check your balance and hesitate for a second too long. You feel it in small decisions that suddenly start to feel heavier than they should. And the strange part is, nothing looks completely broken. You're still functioning, still working, still doing what you're supposed to do. But something doesn't feel stable, like you're holding everything together, barely, instead of actually moving forward. And maybe you've asked yourself this, quietly. Why does it feel like no matter what I do, it's never enough? Not in a dramatic way, in a tired way. Because this isn't about laziness, and it's not about lack of effort. You've been trying, but something keeps slipping. And here's what most people never realize. The pressure you feel now started long before today. This isn't about money. It's about timing. Because financial stress doesn't suddenly appear when things go wrong. It builds, slowly, while everything still looks fine, while you're still earning, still spending, still believing you have time. Until one day, something shifts, and suddenly, there's no margin, no space to think, no room to adjust, only reaction. And that's when it feels overwhelming. But that moment, that's not where the problem began. That's just where you noticed it. Because there was a man who understood this before it happened, before the crisis, before the pressure, before everything collapsed around him. He saw it coming, and he didn't react. He prepared. While everyone else was living normally, he was already thinking differently. And that changed everything. Because most people don't lose money first. They lose awareness first. And what you're about to understand is not just how to deal with financial pressure, but how to see it before it controls you. There's a detail about Joseph that most people completely miss. They remember the prison. They remember the betrayal. They remember the moment he rises. But that's not where everything changed. It changed before that. When Pharaoh had the dream, no one could explain it. Not the advisors, not the wise men, not the ones who were supposed to have answers. Because it wasn't just a dream. It was a warning. 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. And this is where the difference appears. Most people hear famine and feel fear, because they're already late. Joseph heard abundance and saw responsibility. That's the separation, because the average mind focuses on the problem, but a prepared mind focuses on the window before the problem, and that window is where everything is decided. Most people think collapse begins when things go wrong. It doesn't. It begins when things are still going right, and no one is paying attention. Because abundance has a way of relaxing you. It makes you believe things will continue the same way. It removes urgency. It softens discipline. It creates the illusion that there's always time later. So what do most people do? They consume everything. They adjust their lifestyle. They expand their spending. They assume tomorrow will match today. But Joseph didn't think like that. He didn't celebrate the abundance. He organized it. He didn't treat it as reward. He treated it as responsibility. Because he understood something most people ignore. What you do when things are good determines how you survive when they're not. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Because if you're honest, most people don't prepare during abundance. They relax into it. They wait. They assume. They delay decisions that feel unnecessary in the moment. And that's exactly how vulnerability is created. Not through lack, but through unstructured gain. Joseph saw the same abundance everyone else saw, but he interpreted it differently. While others saw more, he saw limited time. While others thought, we're safe, he thought, this is the only moment we can prepare. And that changed everything. Because when the famine came, it wasn't just that he had resources. He had structure. He had clarity. He had control. And everyone else? They had nothing stored, and no time left to fix it. That's why they went to him. Not because he was lucky, but because he saw what they ignored, while there was still time to act. And this is where the mirror turns toward you. Because this isn't just a story, it's a pattern. And the question isn't whether a famine will come. It always comes, in different forms. Loss, delay, unexpected pressure. Moments where income slows, or life accelerates faster than you planned. The real question is, what are you doing while things are still stable? Because most people don't lose money. They lose awareness first. And by the time they feel the pressure, the window to move freely is already closing. The mistake almost everyone makes is waiting. Not because they're careless, because it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels normal. It feels reasonable. It feels like there's still time. You tell yourself you'll adjust later, when things get tighter, when something actually forces you to change. But here's the truth most people avoid. Waiting doesn't feel like a decision, but it is. And it's one that slowly removes your ability to choose later. Because every time you delay, you're not staying in the same place. You're losing margin. And you don't feel it until you need it. Losing flexibility. Losing time to think clearly. Until one day, something small happens. Not a disaster. Just a shift. An unexpected expense. A delay. A drop in income. A moment you didn't plan for. And suddenly, everything feels heavier than it should. Not because the problem is massive, but because there's no space left around it. That's when pressure turns into urgency. And urgency is where people make their worst decisions. Because when you're under pressure, you don't think long-term. You think relief. You move fast. Not because it's the right move, but because it feels like the only move. And that's how people get trapped. Not by the situation itself, but by the way they react to it. Joseph never entered that cycle. Not because his life was easy, but because his decisions were made before urgency existed. He didn't wait for fear to guide him. He acted while everything was still calm, while he still had space to think. And that's the part most people resist, because acting early feels unnecessary. It's even uncomfortable. It feels like you're restricting yourself for a problem that hasn't happened yet. So you delay. You soften the importance. You convince yourself it can wait. And slowly, without noticing, you build a structure that only works when nothing goes wrong. And that's not stability. That's fragility. Because real stability isn't tested when everything is fine. It's revealed when something breaks. And you're still standing, still thinking, still able to choose instead of react. And here's the part most people don't want to admit. If your financial life only works when everything goes right, then it was never working. It was just holding, temporarily. The pressure you feel now didn't start today. It's been building. Through postponed decisions, through ignored patterns, and through moments where you knew something needed to change, but didn't. And now, it feels urgent. But the truth is, the real opportunity to change was always before this moment. And the longer you wait, the less space you have to do it right. What Joseph built wasn't just storage, it was structure. And this is where most people get it wrong. They try to fix money with effort, more hours, more pressure, more sacrifice. But effort without structure leaks. And most people try to pour faster instead of fixing the leak. It's like pouring water into a bucket full of holes. The problem isn't how much you pour, it's what you never fixed. So no matter how much comes in, it disappears. Not because you're careless, but because there's nothing directing it, nothing holding it, nothing multiplying it. And that creates a cycle most people never escape. Work, receive, spend, repeat, movement without progress, activity without accumulation. Joseph refused to live like that. He didn't just collect grain, he organized flow. Yet he created a system where everything that came in had a role, a purpose, a destination. Nothing was random, nothing was emotional, nothing was left to chance. And that's the shift most people never make, because they treat money like something to manage, instead of something to design. So what happens? Money enters, and immediately gets absorbed. Bills, habits, impulse decisions, small choices that feel harmless, but compound over time. And slowly, that creates something dangerous. Not lack of income, but lack of control. Because if you don't decide where your money goes, it will decide for you, and it will always choose the fastest exit. Joseph understood that during abundance, when everything felt safe, when it would have been easy to relax. He chose discipline, not extreme, not restrictive, strategic, because structure creates boundaries. And boundaries create something most people chase without realizing it. Freedom. Freedom to not panic when something unexpected happens. Freedom to think instead of react. Freedom to say no without everything collapsing around you. Joseph didn't eliminate the famine. He made it irrelevant to his survival. That's a completely different level of thinking. He wasn't trying to control the future. He was preparing himself to remain stable inside it. And when everything around him started to break, he didn't enter fear. He stepped into authority. Because when everything shakes, stability becomes power. People didn't go to him because he had more in the moment. They went to him because he had managed differently before the moment arrived. And that's where the shift happens. But because once you start building structure, you stop reacting to life, and you start responding to it. With clarity, with intention, even under pressure. And it all begins with a question most people avoid. Where is everything going, and why? Because once you see it clearly, you can't go back to not seeing. And that's where control begins. Not with more money, but with better direction. There's a moment that most people misread. They think it's stress. They think it's pressure. They think it's just life getting harder. But it's not. It's exposure. Because what you're feeling right now isn't random. It's a reaction to something deeper. The real problem isn't lack of money. It's untrained reactions. Automatic. Fast. Invisible. The way you respond when something shifts. The way you decide when things feel uncertain. The way you move when pressure shows up. That's what's being revealed. Not your situation, your pattern. And most people never stop to see it. They just feel it and try to escape it. They distract themselves. They normalize the discomfort. They tell themselves it will pass. But it doesn't. Because the situation changes. But the reaction stays the same. And that's why the cycle repeats. More money doesn't fix it. More income doesn't fix it. Because if the pattern doesn't change, the outcome won't either. Joseph understood something most people don't. Before you manage resources, you have to manage yourself. Because if your reactions are driven by emotion, your decisions will always be short-term. You'll choose relief over stability, speed over clarity, impulse over intention. And that's how people stay stuck, even when opportunities appear. Joseph didn't allow that. Not in prison, not in delay, not in uncertainty. He stayed consistent when nothing around him justified it. He didn't wait for the right moment to act differently. He became the person who could act differently in any moment. And that's the shift most people resist. Is because it means taking responsibility before results show up. It means changing behavior before life forces you to. It means correcting patterns that feel normal, and that's uncomfortable. Because once you see your patterns clearly, you can't blame the situation anymore. You can't say, it's just how things are. You realize, this is how I've been responding. And that's where pressure becomes valuable. Not something to escape, something that reveals. Because once you see it, you have a choice. You can go back to automatic reactions, or you can interrupt them, quietly, consistently, without needing everything to be perfect first. And when you do that, something subtle starts to change. The stress doesn't disappear overnight, but it loses control over you. Because now, you're not inside the chaos anymore. You're observing it, understanding it. And when you understand something, you can navigate it. Not perfectly, but intentionally. And that's the moment where everything begins to shift. Not outside, inside. And then, something shifts. Not outside, inside. Because once you stop reacting and start seeing clearly, you step into something most people never reach. Stability. Not as a result of money, but as a result of structure. Because when everything shakes, stability becomes power. Joseph didn't rise because the famine came. He rose because when it came, he was the only one not controlled by it. Everyone else was desperate, trying to buy time, trying to survive one more day, trying to fix in the moment what was never prepared before it. But Joseph wasn't thinking like that. He wasn't thinking from pressure. He was thinking from preparation, while everyone else was thinking from pressure. And that gave him something rare. Authority. Not position, not title, authority. Yes, because when chaos spreads, people don't follow the loudest voice. They follow the most stable one. And stability doesn't come from luck. It comes from decisions made long before the crisis appears. That's why people came to Joseph. Not because he suddenly had more resources, but because he had built something that didn't collapse. He had reserves. He had clarity. He had control. And in a world where everyone else lost those things, that made him the answer. That's what most people misunderstand about provision. They think provision appears in the moment of need. But real provision is built before the need exists. It's what you prepare in silence that determines how you stand in chaos. And once you understand that, you stop chasing quick fixes. You stop making decisions just to feel relief. Because relief is temporary. Structure is permanent. And the moment you choose structure over relief, your entire direction changes. You start building something that doesn't depend on everything going right. Something that absorbs impact without breaking. something that allows you to think, even when pressure increases. That's where peace begins. Not because problems disappear, but because they stop controlling you. And from that place, you start seeing what others miss. Opportunities inside chaos, openings inside pressure, paths that only appear to those who are not desperate. Joseph didn't just survive the famine, he expanded in the middle of it. While others were losing everything, he was gaining influence, responsibility, and control. Not by chance, by design. And that's where this stops being a story and becomes a mirror. Because the question is no longer, what is happening to me? The real question becomes, what am I building before the next season arrives? And now, everything comes down to something most people avoid. Not because they don't understand it, but because they do. Because at this point, it's not confusion anymore. It's recognition. You've seen the pattern. You've felt the pressure. You've noticed the moments where something needed to change and didn't. And that leads to a question most people try not to sit with. What needs to change that I already know hasn't? Not what you just discovered, what you've been avoiding. Because this isn't about learning something new. It's about confronting something familiar. The habits that felt small, the decisions that felt harmless, the delays that felt justified, but quietly kept building the same outcome. And the truth is, nothing changes until that question is answered with action. Not intention, not motivation. Action is small, consistent, intentional action. Joseph didn't transform his reality overnight. He made decisions daily, when nothing looked urgent, when no one was watching. And those quiet decisions became everything when the pressure arrived. So this isn't about doing something extreme. It's about doing something honest. Looking at your reality without avoiding it, without softening it, without pretending it's fine, and deciding, even if it's uncomfortable, I'm not continuing like this. That decision alone changes direction. Because once you decide, you stop moving automatically. You question what used to feel normal. You interrupt what used to be instant. You create space where there was none. And slowly, something new begins to form. Not instantly visible, but real. A different structure, a different rhythm, and a different relationship with what you have. And over time, that becomes stability. Not the kind that depends on perfect conditions, the kind that holds, even when conditions change. So before you leave this moment, ask yourself one thing. What am I still ignoring that I already understand? Sit with that, because the answer won't be loud, but it will be clear. And what you do with it will determine everything that comes next. Because peace doesn't come from having more. It comes from knowing you're finally building before it's too late.